Say less is a phrase that this show has never heard before. Like, it's crazy how I'm going to over-explain everything that this show did wrong, yet I'm still gonna come off like Cliff Notes compared to this show's non-stop exposition. They really looked at the Star Wars prequels dialogue and said, let's do that, but unironically. We can blame the studio for a lot of things, and I will, but it's just crazy to me how a show aimed for Game of Thrones fans somehow trusts its audience less than the kids show from 2007. Netflix's Avatar: The Last Airbender, it's not great, it's not good, but I wouldn't quite call it terrible till I started thinking about what actually happens in it, and then it just all falls apart. This adaptation was 6 years in the making. The original creators dipped. The source material is one of the best cartoons of the early 2000s. So this show was pretty much always doomed to come up short, as it was never gonna be as good as the original, with its only silver lining being that the Shyamalan film set the bar so low, even James Cameron can't find it. People have defended this thing like their lives depend on it. Others have attacked it like it shot their parents in an alley. I can't pretend that I'm not on Team Batman, but I'll try and give credit where credit is due, yet there won't be much of it, as even for a supposed remix, I think the show struggles to find its own leg to stand on. It can't stop talking, it fails at basic setup and payoff, and it walks back pretty much every theme that it tries to tell. All this show's issues that isn't just the studio can be boiled down to one thing, and unfortunately, it's the writing. So pull up a chair, grab some popcorn, because I'm about to explain everything this show did wrong, and it's not gonna be pretty. If you like this show, good for you, really. But to me, this entire thing is a massive downgrade, so buckle up, there will be spoilers. We will bring up the original, as when the best thing I can say about it is that it's better than the movie, you know there's a problem.
That I have no track record of failure.
You sure about that?
So just to jump into my best worst analogy ever, this show feels like an overcooked stew. The original Avatar was made up of small ornate meals, handcrafted to deliver a certain feeling, message, or theme. In contrast, New Avatar feels like they just picked bits and pieces of those original meals, threw them in a pot, and cooked it way too long, resulting in all those ideas so lovingly crafted for a specific context or character to just blend together. Till all you have left is this dull stew where every bite tastes like the last, and while you might get hints of what an ingredient used to be, it just doesn't hit the same. Best thing you can say about it is that it's not terrible, there's no highs, but there's also no lows, just the same overly processed experience all the way through. Which is why when I describe this show, it's not really as mid, but more as eh. Like, I'd eat it, some people may even like it, but I know what the things here are supposed to taste like, so it's always going to come up short. Some of these ingredients and ideas could go together, but not with this cooking, and especially not with what I imagine to be the constant notes from the guys who own the restaurant, who are screaming at these chefs to make this dish for everyone, till eventually, predictably, it's for no one, especially after they took out anything marginally spicy.
It's pretty basic. Yeah. It's very, very basic.
I want to make this very clear. I don't blame any of the actors on this show. They all seem like wonderful people who are trying their best with what they're given. And I also want to give the writers the benefit of the doubt, as any show this size that isn't run by some megastar very quickly stops being treated like telling a story and starts being treated like a franchise project. One where every jackass with an opinion in stock gets saying what should be added or cut till the whole thing is a bloated mess of exposition where they explain the same shit over and over again with no room for subtext. As someone was terrified at the idea that some kids wouldn't get it or be confused for a fraction of a second. There were a lot of chefs in this kitchen, and most of them can't even cook. So when I'm being mean, I just want to be clear that I understand that the circumstances for making this thing probably weren't ideal. That said, this show is a miss for me, and it all centers around the dialogue and the over-explanation.
I like to play airball and eat banana cakes and goof off with my friends. That's who I am.
When people said that this show's dialogue sounded like the prequels, I thought they were joking. But no, they were dead on, and it's somehow worse. Like, everyone talks the same. They all repeat the same info just back to back constantly. It doesn't feel like they just did the prequels. It felt like they made a parody, but then they decided to just play it straight. Everyone explains everything with no room for us to actually feel any of it. This is the worst example of tell don't show I've seen in a while. And true story, I need to take a break from watching this show after just 5 minutes. I just started laughing too hard at how dumb it seemed to think its audience was. As at this point, there is no other explanation for this much exposition.
We'll be prepared for your attack.
When your king receives those plans,
like, we get a decent action scene to start, but then we just get 4 minutes straight of repeating the same shit 6 different ways. Even when it's something as simple as Sozin tricked this guy and now he's gonna go kill the Avatar.
that means all eyes will be on the Earth Kingdom. All eyes but ours.
They're done. We can move on. But no, we gotta watch these people drone on through this entire play-by-play.
You wanted us to know. We aren't the real target. No shit, Sherlock.
See, Soldier Boy here thinks that he got the Fire Nation's plans to the Earth Kingdom, to which Sozin replies,
That means all eyes will be on the Earth Kingdom. All eyes but ours.
Now, because I'm not 4, I immediately understand that this is a trap. This was Sozin's plan. That he wanted the Earth Kingdom to leak this information as a ruse to distract them from his real goal. From just that one line, I got the implication. We knew what Sozin was up to, we could just cut to the air nomads, add a dramatic boom here, and we would be all good. Except no.
The entire world will turn their attention to the Earthbenders.
Bro, why the fuck are we still talking? Why are we still on this? You don't have to give us the step-by-step of what your plan is. There's only 2. Sozin spoon-feeds his entire plan to this Earth Kingdom soldier till he gets it. And I think for a second, okay, we're good. Everyone here gets it. We have to be done. We have a whole other moment where we could have just cut to the air nomads and we would visually understand what his real aim is. We don't have to keep talking about it. But no. We have to watch Sozin kill this guy, get a look at how evil he is. And for a second, I thought we were free. Like, maybe we'd be okay. He is the big, bad, scary man. If he talks like this and only him, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Then the other guy talks.
A masterful ruse, Your Highness. But tactically, the Airbenders are not the threat.
Not only do we waste 2 minutes explaining something that could have been conveyed in 15 seconds, but we gotta stop and watch these villains congratulate themselves on what a great plan it was, and then get more exposition as we have Sozin slowly beat around the bush of how he's gunning for the Avatar. This whole scene is the definition of clunky, overloaded exposition, and we don't need it. We don't need to take this long. The actors are delivering these lines and are being directed as stiff and boringly as possible without an ounce of charisma. But I thought at least it's over. Like, it has to be. Maybe this was just a weird exposition dump to start and we get on to the good stuff. And I was right. Except for one thing.
Step is to eliminate the one person who could stand in his way.
They immediately retell us this exact same plan again, and this was the point where I lost my mind. Avatar: The Last Airbender's intro is legendary. In 1 minute, they're able to set up an entire world, the war, the idea of the Avatar, Katara and Sokka's situation of how their dad left to go fight in it, leaving them in charge of the village. This intro is perfect, it's concise, it tells you everything you need to know while leaving room for you to imagine just how bad the war is thanks to the visuals of destruction and families being split apart. They do all of that in a minute. So the fact that Nuvatar can't even cover a third of that in 7, will also over-explain things that do not matter, it's egregious. It's insane that they repeat the same info 5 different times, while taking even longer to explain what the Avatar is, and all this just destroys the pacing. Like, we do not need to watch the process of reincarnation. We can get that and have that be learned organically later, which they do in fact do.
Their spirit is reborn into a new body in an eternal cycle.
The next Avatar was born into the following nation in the eternal cycle, so...
And also, this needs to be said. It takes us over 20 minutes to finally get us to the start of the cartoon. At that point, we've already ruined the mystery of who's in the glacier, and it all just feels like it's plodding along. This intro, while terrible, is a perfect demonstration of just how weirdly this show is written. It is non-stop exposition where characters will just explain shit repeatedly, while bringing up lore from the show that straight up doesn't matter or adds nothing.
My knife is near. I can sense it. One created with materials from the spirit world.
Like, they could have just had Zhao shank a fish. They didn't need to invent a whole backstory about what he's using, why this is just the perfect time for him to do this, and they could have conveyed all this to us and the characters without using a fucking Force Ghost popping up to tell Aang, just in the middle of battle and as boringly and monotonously as possible. They literally stopped the battle in the North Pole mid-fight to tell Aang what's happening and to command him to go stop it. That is on top of the backstory for everything that's going on.
A rare cosmic event, the barriers between the physical and spirit worlds grow thin.
Everyone in the show talks like they're trying to fill the wiki rather than speaking to another person. And this is such a massive detriment to how the show tells its story, but it is an even bigger detriment to the characters. As first off, everyone is so busy explaining things that we never get a chance for any real chemistry to be built between the actors. Maybe a little bit for the Fire Nation royal family and Zuko's crew, but for the main characters, Team Avatar, they are trapped explaining what's happening or what's happened, and that is just all they do. They are explaining how they feel or just telling us what their relationship is with other people. They never let us see it. The fun banter and sense of family that was in the original Avatar that it just captured so perfectly, it isn't here. I said this in my review of Katang, but everyone in the original managed to be everything to everybody. Katara wasn't just Aang's love interest. She was his friend. She was a maternal figure. She was a caregiver. She was a teacher. She was, yes, a love interest, and she was also Aang's victim. There's such an insane amount of depth to how these characters were able to interact and relate to one another, and that is just all gone here. New Avatar just doesn't give this team Avatar any chances to really hang out or bond. Nearly every conversation becomes about the plot or what's happening around them, not how they feel and their feelings towards one another. With what we do get just being the most basic stuff, like Sokka demeaning Katara, calling her a little girl, Aang giving Katara advice, or Aang just wanting to protect his friends. It's all generic and lacking any form of complexity or chemistry, so much so that I was honestly shocked when they started to call each other Team Avatar. They were making jokes about how Sokka was obsessed with food, but that quirk hasn't been brought up since episode 1. These characters talk so much that we just never have a chance to really explore or get to know the characters. Not to mention, the show is also addicted to splitting up this party. There is not a single episode where they spend more than 5 minutes together without somebody walking away to go do something else. If we're lucky, they'll walk off in pairs like in the secret tunnels, which is one of the few times Sokka and Katara feel like they're actual siblings, not co-workers. This all builds to a team Avatar that doesn't feel like a team, let alone family. And not helping any of this is how the show's clumsy use of exposition results in the characters being incapable of making any decisions, of doing anything that wasn't just directly told to them.
Tragedy awaits the North, and unless you do something about it, another race of benders will be wiped out just as the air nomads will.
Zhao cannot be allowed to meddle with the primal forces of nature.
Something terrible is about to happen.
The characters in this show feel like they are being given quests by NPCs. They're just doing what they're told, which rips away their agency. And before people try to bring up the example, we do have a similar situation in the original. Roku sets a ticking clock for Sozin's comment coming back, but that is there just to set stakes. It is not here to direct the characters to doing a very specific thing, as everything that they do after this is everything that they were already going to do, just now they're doing with more urgency. But here, in New Avatar, it feels less like it's adding stakes, and more like it's cracking a whip over the characters' heads to drive them from point A to point B. Aang is told about the ocean and moon spirits in both versions, but in the original, he is actively looking for that answer as he needs help. While in New Avatar, he is stopped mid-fight to be given the full exposition dump and to drop everything he's doing to go and deal with it. Like, the idea of Aang mastering the elements is basically non-existent in this first season. Aang doesn't even attempt to learn waterbending this entire time. Instead, what sends him to the North Pole is a vision from Avatar Kyoshi. This was done, to paraphrase the showrunner, to give more narrative compulsion moving forward. AKA, it's a story trying to justify why we can't have side adventures or shenanigans with the cast. But we'll get into how each of the characters screwed over in its own section. The effect on the story, though, is that all these things feel like it rips away choice from the characters. It's struggling to come up with organic ways to have characters be at the right place at the right time, so it defaults to exposition ghosts to pop up and tell Aang what to do. Zuko, yeah, he's making his own decisions, but so much of his plans boil down to Iroh's advice. The characters are only ever reacting to what's around them, and that just makes the show so much less interesting. The story and the characters honestly all feel like they're on autopilot. Not helping this is the fact that this story, trying to be more serialized, makes Aang this duty-bound and just determined hero to go get the mission done. Not in character for the cartoon, but then that makes it laughable, as after all its bullshit about, hey, we gotta go to the North Pole, it then, because this is an actual show, not a movie, we have to have adventures along the way. When we stop to have those adventures, we also stop to waste time justifying why we aren't going to the North Pole.
What about getting to the North? Didn't Kyoshi tell you had to get there to prevent a tragedy?
Yes. I need to get to the North so I could save the waterbenders.
This story almost feels like it's a shame that it has to stop anywhere and help people. That it's embarrassed that it set up this massive ticking clock, and that it feels like it can't let Team Avatar do anything without apologizing for it. One the show can't even commit to, as in episode 3, Aang says he'll stop the terrorist, then he gets imprisoned. And in episode 4, he immediately goes back to saying, hey, I need to go help the Northern Water Tribe, when, and this is a small thing, he doesn't know that he stopped the terrorists. His friends did, yes, they stopped the bomb and Katara froze Jet to a wall in a imitation of what happened in the cartoon. But all that happened without Aang's knowledge. he was never told about whether or not they caught Jet, rendering Aang's behavior in episode 4 less mission accomplished and more the writing showing its ass. It wants Aang to desperately go up north to ignore all distractions, so as soon as the plot's done, it tells him to move on, when logically he actually doesn't know that he's saved the day. And when he does start going to the North Pole, yeah, he stops again immediately, and then in just the peak of wasting our fucking time, stops and tries to explain to us why helping this village takes precedent over the North Pole. These are our fucking heroes. They shouldn't have to explain and feel bad about helping other people. We get one episode of that in the cartoon, and then it's just done. It is a single arc. While here, it is constantly brought up and never feels like they ever say, okay, we need to help people or should help people. No, it's like, we should be going to North Pole, but we kind of have to like maybe help some people out here. But the plot can't let anything go unexplained, so it stops everything to keep wasting our time. This is what I mean by the story not letting the characters make decisions. It never feels like what happens is a product of the choices and thinking of the characters. Rather, they just go where the story needs them to. This situation is honestly to no one's benefit. This makes the characters less interesting. It makes the story feels like it is begrudgingly doing certain moments. And then the writer will just get sloppy and forget what information the characters know and don't know. So much of these characters' interactions, what their motivations are, what they are going to do in the story, is just based on what other people tell them to do. So much so when they don't have anything to do, they just feel lost and incapable of figuring anything out. The story rarely showing them come up to their own conclusion based on nothing but context clues. And when they do figure shit out, it is the most obvious things.
The spirit of the forest. It's wounded.
No shit, Sherlock.
And when they do figure it out, they explain it to us, the audience. Everything is always being explained. Who the Avatar is? Explained. Teo is explaining the bombers and their possible hideout. Gyatso points Aang in Roku's direction. This story and its way of conveying information just makes all the characters feel like passengers, not active participants. Which then makes it really fucking funny to me when the show does everything in its power to up the angst and make everyone else depressed.
But I also need to help these people so they don't lose their homes and the ones they love, the way I lost mine.
The truth is, not everyone is meant to have people's lives in their hands.
Now, none of these additions are terrible in my mind. There is something to adding more anguish to the characters to make things maybe just a little bit more serious. From taking Sokka's worry of not being as good as his father, to having him think his dad viewed him as a disappointment. These changes add more explicit emotional turmoil to the story, but since most of it is conveyed through bland dialogue, these attempts at pathos and at a more serious tone just kinda come off as try-hard.
No one said anything, but I could tell. They were scared of me.
I don't care for it. It's one thing to have them grapple more with their personal issues, but whether or not they do it well is a whole other debate. When I'm going to end, it's not. Every case of increased angst feels like a flimsy attempt to make the characters deeper, but since all the characters' personalities got gutted, and we don't have opportunities to really see them stew on their thoughts without having them tell us, all these angst upgrades, all this extra trauma, all of it feels performative. Now, the show wants to be taken more seriously by making things more depressing, by making things way more explicit, but rather than making things better, it all just falls flat. We take the quiet horror of what happened to the air nomads, finding their bodies, and seeing evidence that the Fire Nation was here, and change that to us watching them do backflips and get burnt to a crisp. This attempt to make the show more dramatic feels ham-fisted as nothing is left to the imagination. And the effect that this new angst has on the characters, it's just told to us rather than like naturally shaping who these people are, with them usually just getting bummed out till they just suddenly get past it. Making juicy character stuff like Katara struggling to deal with the death of her mother, to being simplified to just being a simple mental block that is keeping her from getting good at waterbending. Then she rips off Kung Fu Panda 2 and then she just gets good. Sokka just finds a new path in life with every woman and father figure in the show lining up to tell him what a special boy he is, while Gyatso comes from beyond the grave to give Aang a pass for not being there for the attack. A sentiment that isn't even a fraction of what it could be since the show changes Aang running away from home, of running from his responsibilities, to just him going for a walk.
Just needs to go up where things always make more sense. At least for now.
All these things are superficial and obvious emotional issues that they face and just overcome. Well, in the cartoon, while not having these things be as explicit, I think it handles all these topics way better. As in the absence of these issues or explicit emotional trauma porn, what we really get is the aftermath. we see how these tragedies inform and shape the characters. The death of Katara's mother didn't just hold her back from waterbending, it fucking forced her to become her mother. Katara was forced to take on the responsibility of being Sokka's mom, aging her beyond her years, and by the time Aang shows up, that tragedy had molded her into this caregiver who feels like she has to be responsible and helpful for everyone. But even though she is such a kind and empathetic person who loves everyone, she also kind of resents how she's been trapped in this role and can get pissed when she's underappreciated, like how Sokka was just taking her for granted. Katara losing her mom made her realize just how valuable hope is, to not give in to despair, and to always think that things can change. What happened to her mom informs everything about Katara, with the show trusting us to just pick up on that. We don't get Katara angsting about her mother in the first season, but you feel the impact of that death in every aspect of her character. It molded Katara into who she is, and in comparison, the Netflix version just gives Katara basically nothing. They gutted her character, removed her traits, yet they think giving her more explicit angst and mommy issues will make up for that. When no, it doesn't. Really, how New Avatar uses tragedy and forces us to see these most traumatic events makes their presentation less impactful and more childish than the PG show that ran on Nickelodeon. This is pretty consistent across the board, as it feels like this show is trying to use tragedy to replace depth, as we don't spend any time really fleshing out these characters and their feelings. We only have time to watch them talk about their feelings, not actually see them being felt. And mind you, New Avatar is only about an hour shorter than the first season of the original, if you cut a few episodes. So this live-action adaptation doesn't have any excuse to not give them any time to be developed. And I feel like the perfect example of how the show trades aesthetic and exposition for actual pathos is how they treat Heibai.
I'm gonna make this right.
Bye, bitch!
In the cartoon, after the Fire Nation burnt down the forest, a spirit monster started attacking a village and kidnapping the people, only for Aang to later realize that this monster was actually the spirit of the forest. Not lashing out at them because it's a monster, it was lashing out in grief and rage for what had become of its home, with Aang stopping it not through force, but by recognizing and empathizing with that loss. He's able to see it for more than just a beast, but as something that had been hurt. Aang gave it the same speech that Katara gave him, re-emphasizing the importance of hope, Katara's wisdom, and allowing Heibai to move on and release all the people that had been captured. This short, 20-minute episode was a great story about how war makes even the innocent do terrible things. It speaks to the horrors of war and the desire to lash out, but how through it all we can't give up hope nor dismiss the pain of what others are feeling. That is how the cartoon handles it. Now, compare that to what New Avatar does. Heibai is a fucking afterthought. Despite the episode keeping the same setup for their story, the forest was burned, they had turned into a monster form, Katara had the acorn and recites a speech about hope, but in spite of having all those elements, the actual message is trapped and diluted by things from 5 other episodes. We don't get that moment of fear where we're forced to fight monster Heibai before Aang figures out who the spirit actually is. Instead, Aang, not through empathy or an enhanced connection to the spirits, recognizes Heibai through a scar on its face and just tells us who this is. And then we never see Heibai again, with the resolution being all about Aang making this about himself and his duty to prevent this, stripping this story of its core message of empathy while paying lip service to the idea. Not to mention making the whole episode as unempathetic as possible, constantly apologizing for showing any of it, as this show desperately wants to be seen as mature, hence stripping the story of its shenanigans, but also downplaying the power of hope to focus on the grim duty on Aang's shoulders. As this show is more interested in telling us how the world sucks, not how to build a better one.
I know you're in pain. I saw your spirit. I'm gonna make this right, and I'm gonna save my friends.
They remove the nuance and the pathos of what happened to Heibai and boil it down to just a footnote, thus not even getting a chance to really absorb the message. Not only does Heibai attack, the party is split up, but suddenly the episode is about Ko the Face Stealer. As yeah, the thing kidnapping the villagers wasn't Heibai out of misguided rage over what happened to the forest, it was just Ko stealing himself a snack. This reduces the setup of the episode, the message of hope, and renders all of it an afterthought to Aang trying to figure out the more practical and external threat of saving his friends from a spirit. And mind you, we never get any resolution for Heibai's suffering. This is like one of those rides at Disneyland where we just chugging along and wave at the sets and the mechanical characters, then move on and just never address it again, not letting any of it really sit with us or gain anything from the experience. This is what I mean when I say the show wants the aesthetic of being serious and for grown-ups, while actually being less mature and nuanced than the original. It also ties into my point of how this show is overcooked too, with the feelings and pathos being boiled away into a bland experience that struggles struggles to find a point. We fully are wasting the ingredients that this thing is made out of. Like, this episode has Wang Shi Tong show up to give exposition. We have Heibai show up just to break up the party. We have fucking Ko show up just to keep the party apart and to force us to do exposition dreams. And also make Aang go to the fire temple so he can finally talk to Roku. Also, June is here.
I'll let it pass because your dad's kind of cute.
There's ideas and elements from 5 different episodes, and none of them are really gelling together. And the show doesn't really make them work to build up to something actually compelling, it's just serviceable. It's a theme park ride, where we're seeing nostalgia, having things that vaguely kind of work together, but the message and themes are just all over the place. The episode tries to retrofit Heibai's being affected by war onto everyone else, with them not even getting the chance to overcome their past. This episode only makes them wallow in the worst moments of their lives, making explicit what was already implied, and boils down complex experiences and their reactions to it into singular events that either whelm or made me laugh. Oh, this moment is on me, but the mystery and horror of what you don't see will always trump the thing that you actually do. Seeing the story try to build this heroic moment of the mom sacrificing herself for her daughter, looking at her right in the eyes and going, hey, this one's for you. Then for her to attempt a fake waterbend only to get casually cooked. It is unintentional comedy to me. This show's attempt to adapt season 1 of Avatar, it's functional. It's all blended together well enough that you won't fully question why certain things are being put together, even if the message just doesn't fully gel. And if you're new to this franchise, you'll get through it fine. But I know what all these parts used to be, so seeing them watered down and made less interesting with bad dialogue just rubs me the wrong way. With the biggest casualties of this being, of course, the characters. So let's go over pretty much all of them and how they all got screwed. And we just have to start with one of the worst examples, Aang.
Connection. Building bridges. That's how he's gonna be the Avatar.
Yeah, this is gonna be a rough one. So Aang is kind of a bitter pill to swallow, as the fun tricksy figure that he was in the cartoon is just gone in this version. With what we get instead being this doomed, duty-bound, depressed guy with trauma and a mortgage who is just getting talked down to by all of his past lives, who really went from people who would give Aang suggestions to actively telling Aang what to do despite telling him, oh yeah, you can just do your own thing. But Aang as a character in the show I do think is a miss, as the show really doesn't get Aang. In the original, Aang really is just a kid. He's goofy and fun-loving and just wants to go on adventures and act his age. So much of Aang's arc in the show is built around him growing up and growing into the role of the Avatar, of him being forced to mature and grow as a result of that weight, with him hating the fact that this role has been put upon him. I know that sounds similar to what they're doing in the adaptation, but context and presentation are very important, and Nuvatar, it's, oh my god, it's really weirdly obsessed with just the idea of power.
You must fill several roles, and many of them require unparalleled strength.
That's why I need to master all the bending disciplines? To become strong?
Yes.
In the original, the journey of becoming the Avatar and mastering all 4 elements is treated as way more important than just mastering the super mode. The idea that is hammered through the show is balance, that mastering all 4 elements, seeing the world, all that is what makes the Avatar a more complete person as he's able to see through multiple perspectives. That the 4 nations may be separate, but they all make up one world, and that's what makes the Avatar the bridge between them. Meanwhile, the focus in Nuvatar feels like it's all on just the power and Aang being the special, whose divinely ordained job is to bring peace to everything, with all the emphasis being put on his ability to do so, and how Kyoshi, in the first introduction of mastering all 4 elements, just phrases it in a way that mastering the elements is a means to the end to mastering the power of the Avatar state.
And to help you gain control over the ultimate power, the Avatar state.
And this idea that the Avatar state is a weapon isn't pushed back against by any of the other Avatars we meet. So we can't really say that this is Kyoshi's hot take, this feels like the point of the show. The idea of power and duty is the main overriding theme of Aang's arc in this season. Aang doesn't even try to learn waterbending. The beginning of his journey to master all 4 elements, to gain knowledge and understanding, it doesn't happen. Instead, all we get is a prophecy of doom and just the constant meaningless questioning of what kind of Avatar Aang will be. This I feel makes Aang's role in the story just feel so much more generic. He's basically just the special, with everyone looking to him for strength. The idea of there being different types of avatars is valid, yet in the context of a show about bringing the world together, having everything come back to can Aang make the hard choices feels wrong in a way that I hate. Not even getting into how the show botches its own message in my opinion, as the show does keep going on and on about how Aang will bring people together, how his friends will let him do the impossible, how this idea seems to be the right one, as he's told to ditch it, only then in the finale, when faced with an impossible choice, does Aang choose to side with his friends? No, he caves and uses the Ocean Spear to push back the Fire Nation. And this is treated as this big climactic moment, Aang accepting his role as the Avatar, and I can't help but think it's like a betrayal of everything that they were allegedly setting up. All their talk of Aang doing the impossible, of finding another way, of coming together, it all gets thrown out the window as Aang solos the Fire Fleet. Like his friends don't help, they barely even help bring him back. Aang just goes back on everything the show had been setting up until this point, and it does so just for the sake of drama, when really it doesn't need this. Especially since if the Fire Nation is meant to represent might makes right, then Aang and his friends should represent the antithesis of that, of finding another way and bringing people together and working together. But what they do to Aang is just to hyper-focus on his duty, that he's a traumatized kid with no room for fun, then to turn his combo with the Ocean Spirit from a wrath of nature to a sacrifice of him giving up his humanity for victory, and runs counter to what this show claims to be doing.
That's his real power. Connection, building bridges. That's how he's gonna be the Avatar.
You can rely on your friends. And that's the only way I'm gonna save the world.
3 hours later.
And another thing that kills me is that this situation parallels what happens at the end of the original, where all the avatars are pressuring Aang to just kill Ozai, to abandon his principles and do what needs to be done. And in the original, Aang finds another way. But in New Avatar, he just goes through with it. Aang doesn't think his friends will help him. He is between a rock and a hard place, so he sacrifices his needs for the world. If they have the same debate in New Avatar, they can't. Because Aang would just kill Ozai, no discussion, just for the good of the world. And it creates a situation where the Avatar's arc in this story, his coming of age, it just gets boiled down to its most depressing, serious, and simple form. There is no real arc about him learning and growing from the elements, of him becoming a better person by experiencing the world, with his actions again running counter to everything that they allegedly set up. So it makes Aang in this role of the Avatar just painful to watch. And not helping any of this is the fact that the show keeps trying to have its cake and eat it too.
You think like a child.
Is that really so bad?
12 seconds later.
Because all of this is my responsibility.
They keep saying that Aang is fun-loving and goofy, but no, he's bummed out and depressed constantly, with us only getting brief glimpses of fun, with his flashbacks implying that yeah, he was kind of depressed even in the past. And this all just gathers to create a trap that the show walks right into, where all the characters keep yelling at Aang, telling him you need to get serious or how bad the situation is, which would work for the old fun-loving Aang who was trying to run away from his responsibilities. But this one, right here, is so on the grind that it honestly feels like bullying to yell at him for this. We get it. He is already serious, making all these rants just feel like beating a dead horse that is deader than Gyatso. Like, it drives me insane that rather than us learning about how Aang was feeling crushed by the responsibility of being the Avatar, that he did the childish but understandable thing of running away from home. But in this show, they have Aang learn he's the Avatar the same day that he runs away, and he doesn't actually run away. He just goes for a ride to clear his head.
Just need to go where things always make more sense. At least for now.
Is crazy to me, as it robs Aang of what he perceives to be his greatest failure. The fact that he wasn't there and that he ran away intentionally. Like, it's crazy how this story wants to take itself so much more seriously. They have all this guilt, all this trauma, robbing Aang of having actual flaws, which cause him to make actual mistakes. It's just baffling to me. Aang, he was going to come back. So rather than him having like an actual thing that he needs to grapple with that he feels like he truly fucked up, instead making it into this dumb penitent hero thing where coincidence made it so Aang wasn't there, so he beats himself up about it, till the literal ghost of his mentor tells him it's all good. We can't even have him grapple with the consequences of anything. Just like we can't make any actual mistakes despite the show desperately wanting everything to be more serious, yet they rob Aang of what could have been his greatest failure. They reduce Aang's actions from a mistake of youth to a victim of circumstance. When he was already a victim of circumstance, he was born the Avatar. This show, it's bloated, it's overly serious, it is trying too hard to be for adults. I think the thing that really grinds my gears isn't the fact that they're not following the original, it's that they just can't take the W. I'm okay with them changing things, but them consistently taking iconic moments from the original and deciding those are the ones they need to add more stuff to, not before or after, but the ones that are just quick. The ones that give you everything you need to know, no stretch whatsoever, and they decide, okay, we need to really stretch these ones out. So they end up adding more stuff and mess with the flow of the actual scene. So now they have to invent a newer, weaker climax or result for the character. Like Aang finding out that he's the Avatar that night rather than a few months before. In the cartoon, they can explain Aang's reluctance to tell people he's the Avatar and his apprehension when taking on the role comes from the fact that his friends started treating him differently when the truth came out, that he was isolated because of this, but by making him learn that night, they can't have him experience the same ostracism of being the Avatar and losing his friends. So instead, what they add to create a similar but worse effect is that Aang, he's just always been too strong. That he's always been OP and the other kids were scared of him, that they thought he never had to try, which is just a dumber, less interesting way to approach it. It boils Aang's situation again to him just being the special, how he's burdened with such great power, how he's crushed by such great responsibility, and he just succumbs to that. And because of all this, he is stripped of all the fun that defined Aang as a character. They reduce Aang to a bland lead who people talk about being fun, but you never really feel that. Nor do we have enough of a glimpse of him before for there to really be a noticeable transition into his grief and tortured hero thing, and for it to like really mean anything. His arc is nonsense. The idea of being the Avatar is reduced to just how powerful he is. The story betrays the arc that they set up for him in the name of adding stakes, while also removing any semi-controversial aspect of his character that he might learn or grow from, in what just feels like a move made to make him more marketable. Which moves us to the character that this happens to the worst, Sokka.
Katara, no. There's no way you're getting me on that.
So what they did to Aang gives me a headache, but what they did to Sokka makes me want to scream. As the writing for Sokka is kind of a paradox to me. The vibe for Sokka is that he feels like he's the story's favorite character, their special boy. Sokka is comedic relief, so he's kind of allowed to be somewhat of a normal person occasionally. He doesn't always just exposit constantly. And weird enough, out of everyone, he has the most obvious and hammered in arc of how he doesn't need to be a fighter to be a hero. Yet not only do they not follow through or give him any real payoff to this, the way they deliver and hype up Sokka is by basically throwing every other character under his bus to elevate him, which is hilarious since they removed Sokka's arc about becoming less sexist and instead made him the beneficiary of sexist tropes. So yeah, let's just get into all of that.
What matters is not the power inside, it's the will and desire.
Now, out of all the characters in the main cast, Sokka's the one who is the closest to his cartoon counterpart, and therefore the only one with a smidge of personality or fun. Being the comedic relief means that he can actually emote. We get to see him have a personality rather than being constantly told who and what he is. This makes Sokka a relative breath of fresh air in Team Avatar, as between Aang and Katara's characters getting gutted, Sokka is allowed to be the one semi-well-rounded character in the cast, with ideas I don't actually actively dislike on principle. Sokka believing his dad was disappointed and didn't believe him isn't an awful change. It sets up more drama for his character, and creates his own unique take on fueling his desire to be the protector of his village. With his arc then going on about him believing he needs to be this strong warrior, and how that just kind of burns away as he realizes he has other gifts that can help. Sokka in the cartoon did find himself being the smart one who dabbled in science and planning, but that was a role he just kind of naturally but unceremoniously found himself slipping into. It was natural, and you can argue that Sokka experienced something similar just in the background. But bringing that arc to the forefront of his character could be interesting. I just don't think it was handled very well, as it all falls into the same trap of the show just telling, not showing.
Sokka, you're a gifted engineer. Don't ignore that.
By episode 3, Sokka has gone from feeling like he's a failure as a protector to finding out that his true strength may be in his head. But the way this is handled is very shoddy, as we really don't get any good examples of him being intelligent. We don't get any opportunities to see him come up with plans to save the day or figure out something before the other characters. In fact, the one time he tries to do this, the story mocks him for it.
Love is brightest in the dark. You have to let it get dark so you can follow the light. That's how you find the path.
These things are everywhere. On the walls, on the floor. They're pretty random.
Yeah, this moment really rubbed me the wrong way. Sokka in the secret tunnels jumps to the original answer of the riddle, that love is brightest in the dark is a reference to how you need to enter the cave in the dark, so the glowing crystals on the ceiling can guide you out. Sokka reaches that conclusion, then Katara calls him an idiot for it. As that's not the answer, the crystals are everywhere. Why would you think this? This pretty much undercuts Sokka's attempt to be intelligent. Yes, he just started on this arc, but we don't ever get him to be like smart later on either. So while I tolerate the fact that this change forced Katara and Sokka to actually talk about their issues in one of the few good scenes between them, the fact that they set up Sokka trying to be smart, having him do the cartoon's original answer, only to call that answer dumb as fuck, it's just annoying. Especially since the answer that they add instead is the stupidest shit I have ever heard.
So they respond to love? Excuse me, Mr. Badgermole? We'd really appreciate if you could show us the way to the palace.
Okay.
Yeah, when they say love glows brightest in the dark, they didn't mean take a leap of faith and go in there lights out. Instead, what they meant was that they needed to be in love so that the giant badger moles could sense their good vibes and lead them out of the tunnels. That Sokka and Katara's fighting created negative vibes that caused the badger to attack, and it's only by them reaffirming their love for each other that they're able to stop the badger and get out. Now this is dumb. It is so dumb and requires a leap in logic so huge that now it feels like part of the riddle is missing, as there is no way someone who was just entering the caves would get that. That annoys the shit out of me. However, what drives me up the wall is how poorly this idea of the badger moles sensing emotions is implemented. How nonsensical it makes what actually happens. As by the time the badger mole attacks them, supposedly irritated by their negative emotions and conflict, Katara and Sokka were, and I'm going to cover my mouth and scream because it's such an obvious thing. I can't fathom no one caught this in the writing stage. By the time Katara and Sokka were attacked, they were already done fighting! They were done fighting. Like, I saw this scene and I thought something was left out, as it makes the badger moles attacking them feel utterly nonsensical. The siblings were fighting earlier, but then they sat down, talked to each other, made up and consoled one another about their various parental issues.
Sokka, what I said about you and Dad. You led the tribe and protected us with nobody to help you. Dad never had to bear that kind of burden alone. You had it harder than him.
It's only after that do the moles attack. If these moles are fueled by negative emotions, then the moles should have been attacking earlier when they first got in the caves and the light first went out. Not after they already sat down and hashed things out for the most part. They were good. They apologized. Them apologizing again is a formality, not a genuine reconciliation. If this is the lore we're adding to the badger moles, then it at the very least should be consistent with what they set up and be used to help fuel the story. They should be getting attacked throughout. See them getting more mad in the stress, and them apologizing and forgiving one another is what makes a mole finally chill out. And have that just be one big emotional climax. Not two that just makes what happens then confusing. The answer to the riddle is dumb, but the way this sequence plays out is baffling, because they put this emotional climax and reconciliation too early. Katara tells Sokka, like all the women in his life, that he must have had it rough being forced into this leadership position. Sokka praises Katara for her waterbending skills while opening up how he thought he would be the smart one. This is where they come together and open up. This is where they chill out. Only after that does the mole attack, when they're being slightly snippy at each other when they realize that the tunnels are changing. But the thing that makes this magic mole stop being just another apology from both of them. Sokka doesn't even get to be the one to figure out why the badger moles are like this. That secret and honor goes to Katara. This whole sequence just, it blows my mind. Well, from how it refuses to let Sokka be the smart one, how it can't even be structured to have one consistent climax. Instead, it feels like it's rushing to do one because it was afraid we would get mad at the characters for being mad at each other for too long. So it adds a second climax that makes the lore that they just added feel out of sync with the events that we just witnessed. And this thing of the show, having Sokka talk about being smart without actually giving him the chance, it's just something that just keeps happening. Sokka never has a chance to really be the smart one or have a plan that comes in clutch. We have a ship raid at the start of the finale, but that's about it. He talks to a bunch of other water tribesmen off screen. We don't really see him come up with plans or aid in the defense using his knowledge of the Fire Nation. Even when he's with the Mechanist, we don't see a before or after where his improvements help the balloon. We don't see it fail before, then Sokka adds something, suddenly turning into a success. They simply describe what happened without ever giving us a visual of it working and how. Compounding this problem is that Sokka's arc of finding other ways of being a hero and finding value outside of his original idea of being a fighter is doubly undercut by the fact that it's just being told to him constantly by other people. The Mechanist says he's smart, Suki says he can be strong, Yue's consoling him for not feeling good enough, Yue's fucking father, after his daughter just died, stops to console Sokka.
You made sure she wasn't alone. You don't have to be a warrior to be a hero.
Rather than having a quiet, somber scene we get in the cartoon, where the chief reveals that he had a vision that this might happen, and while noble, losing his daughter was still a bitter pill to swallow, that it still sucks, giving Sokka and the chief a brief moment of shared grief. Instead, what happens in New Avatar is that the chief isn't actually allowed to grieve for his daughter. The show won't let us treat Yue's sacrifice as something truly worth mourning. It doesn't want to bum us out. So instead, it lionizes her sacrifice as just a purely heroic act, that she made her own choices and no one could have stopped her. After briefly talking about his daughter, turning around to go dick ride Sokka, saying him just being there was a heroic thing as he got to help his daughter's final moments just be a little bit more bearable. He was able to comfort her. Sokka gets praised. Like, I can't understate this. Sokka gets praised for just being there. In an attempt to empower Yue to make her choice just so much more noble, they somehow are able to make her death and the aftermath just feel so impersonal and all about Sokka's feelings than hers or her father's. Sokka isn't allowed to come through in a big way, yet the story keeps insisting on hyping him up for what feels like existing, as despite being a remix of the original cartoon, some things still need to happen. And Sokka didn't do anything in the major final battle like Aang or Katara did, so the story is trying to add pathos to his situation of doing nothing, but in context feels unearned and taking away from other characters. Speaking of which, let's talk about how New Avatar does Suki and Yue. While it's not a deal breaker to me that they remove Sokka's arc about unlearning sexism, of how he grew up thinking that he had to be the man of the house led him to denigrating women to fuel his own sense of self-importance. Yet New Avatar, they remove that arc about sexism, yet they have Suki and Yue exist just solely to tell Sokka how important he is.
It's the will and desire.
The heart. That's what sets you apart. That's what makes you a warrior.
Go watch Jessie Jenner's video on the live-action Avatar if you want a more in-depth look at this, and how the show just botches its handling of the female characters. But for me, I cannot fathom how they treated Suki. See, in the original, Sokka was a sexist dick, and meeting the Kyoshi warriors where he eats humble pie and realizes the error of his ways. That women can be warriors, and the dichotomy he tries to create of a warrior being separate from gender, falling apart as Suki kisses him, with her dropping this gem.
I am a warrior. But I'm a girl, too.
Suki demonstrates how someone can be strong, feminine, and how these things aren't mutually exclusive or limiting. Suki having a crush on Sokka was cute as it drives the point home. Sokka had to humble himself and embrace the cultural significance of wearing Kyoshi garb, the makeup, the whole shebang, and this starts him on his journey of gaining a greater appreciation of the other cultures, and how his masculinity isn't diminished by wearing a dress. Though they do make fun of him for it, but OG Avatar has its flaws like any show. Suki here is a phenomenal character, yet in New Avatar, it feels like her entire character is boiled down to being down bad for Sokka. And I cannot forgive this.
Thank you, Sokka.
For what?
For bringing the world to me.
This woman is lusting for him the first minute that they meet. She is looking constantly, with her attraction to Sokka's dopiness taking precedent over any other characteristic that they try and pretend to use to flesh her out. And what they give her is just 90s Disney princess cliches. She immediately falls in love with Sokka. She vouches for his presence immediately as she feels so trapped living where she is. And he is just new, he is novel, and he is so unique in bringing the rest of the world to her, which is pretty much every third male fantasy of being considered special, not out of personal ability, but because of how sheltered the other person is, raising them from normal to special based on nothing but the other's lack of experience.
I've always wondered what I'd find. Now I know.
I can gel with the two of them connecting based on their shared experience of being protectors and guardians of their village. But Sokka's arc being taken from eating humble pie, breaking him of his xenophobia and sexism, setting up to constantly learn and grow throughout his travels, to just Sokka being worried he's not good enough. then airdropping him a woman who is down bad and goes out of her way to raise him up. Everything they give Suki feels like it was there just to service Sokka's character, not her own. The whole show seems desperate to have people dick ride Sokka while not giving him anything to actually do or grow from. They make his arc about finding other ways to be strong, but with Suki, he learns he can be strong and saves her using her own move. Genuinely feels like the show was afraid to put him in the dress or have him be sexist in any way, as that might offend some people, even though he unlearns all of that later. But then they make his arc unintentionally sexist by making Suki's character all about being his love interest, who then helps him grow. Suki is more actively teaching him lessons than Sokka is coming to her. She is obsessed from minute one, and they just butcher Suki's character, and it's a shame because Maria Zhang is perfect casting for Suki, yet she is just given nothing. And a side effect of the show leading so into Suki Sokka's ship, not to mention the smaller episode count, is that now it feels like Sokka falling for Yue feels like cheating. Bro literally just met a girl who was in love with him. She gave him her fan as a memento, yet the second he sees Yue, he just feels a special connection and goes for it. I honestly thought with how much they played into the Suki romance, from a quick kiss to every scene with them being romantic, that they were going to change his relationship with Yue. But no. This season feels like it took place over the course of 2 weeks max, and we go from Suki to Yue without even a hint of hesitation. And they both are just here to service his arc, despite the show's attempts to elevate them and make them more fleshed out than their cartoon counterparts. But the end result is just either bad or underwhelming. Cue Yue.
You're funny.
And you're a talking fox.
Her being a foxbeard adds nothing. It's just there to make Sokka and Yue hook up faster. I like that she's a bender in this. Not that they ever do anything with that, minus saving Momo, who for a second I thought maybe they're gonna make Momo the moon spirit and that would have been the funniest shit. But no, they do nothing. She just heals him because we need an excuse to get into the special place. And honestly, how the show handles sexism in the North Pole, well, it's giving this.
Don't worry. She's got help.
It honestly feels like the suits behind this show were just so afraid of offending anybody that they made all the conflicts bland and non-challenging while girl-bossifying Katara and Yue, and it's just so eye-rolling. Like, they want the North to be sexist so Katara can have her fight with Pakku, yet they're also unwilling to deal with the sexism bleeding into the rest of society. So rather than Yue being pressured into an arranged marriage with Han, who only wants to be with her to be the next chief, Yue is given the ability to refuse that marriage, which she does. And she's also now the heir to the throne, so she's extra special, she's in charge, but she's doing the same shit and she's only here for Sokka's benefit. Nuvatar wants her to be this important political figure with power, yet we never actually see her wielding any of it. With her meet cute with Sokka being more about her trying to seem normal in spite of her newfound importance, and it is such a headache and everything here is such wasted opportunities. And also, this is just a minor thing that just occurred to me while editing. They could have just had Yue take it upon herself to go help the civilians, like help women and children get to safety. But rather than her just like deciding that for herself, they invent a scene of her wanting to fight only for her dad to tell her to stay away as she's the heir. Like, despite the show wanting to make her more empowered than her OG self, they somehow still default to making her bow to her father's wishes, when she could have just done the same things, but they could have been purely her choice, not her choice to obey someone else. And follow through on that idea of duty, which is so heavy in the original, but less present here. Though if I'm gonna knock how the show handles Yue again for anything, is that the show tries too hard to pull the same noble death crap it did with Katara's mom. Yue can't just make a hard call and tragically but nobly give her life to revive the moon spirit. She has to stop and explain why this isn't a sad thing.
This isn't a sad thing.
Like, this reminds me of what they do to a character in the adaptation of It 2, where, spoilers for the movie, one guy, well, after finding out an evil clown has come back, decides to, well, not be around anymore. This is messed up, it sets the stakes for everyone else, and it's a bitter thing that is mourned by all the characters who knew him. In the movie, they do this dumb decision to try and make this choice to be more noble and heroic. They say he did it because he was too weak and would have held the others back if he was with them. So him not being around was actually a grand sacrifice. And I feel like this is a similar way to how Yue's death is handled, where the show feels like it has to add more to her, but making her give a speech about life and death and how all this is okay, I feel like all this just takes away from Yue's actual sacrifice. It tries to hand wave this whole situation and make Yue just unambiguously heroic and noble. This feels like just an attempt to coddle the audience and put what's happening in a more positive light, when what's happening was Yue was already making a noble sacrifice, one that is properly mourned in the cartoon, versus here where, again, it feels like an attempt was made to make this more important and more heroic and just take away all the tragedy and the grief that came along with it. So especially with how her post-mortem moment is handled, how it's more about how Sokka was so noble being there for her, and how his presence probably comforted her, even though she was the one who comforted him. It all leaves me feeling very ungenerous to how the show handled Suki and Yue and how it handled its female characters in general. But I think I've been mad for a little bit too long at this point. This show is again just But if you pick apart what it's doing, the decisions it's making, all of them are just infuriating to me on a personal level. So let's just take a rage break, touch some grass, and talk about some characters that the show kinda handles well.
The plan is to reclaim what's rightfully mine.
So no plan.
I'm working on it, Uncle.
Now Zuko, I actually mostly enjoy how our little scarred prince is handled. Is he the same raw nerve of daddy issues he was in the cartoon? No, but they do enough to differentiate him and really make him his own character and to have him work. As unlike with Aang, Sokka, or Katara, I never feel like the writing undercuts or betrays what they're doing with this version of Zuko. All props in the world to Dallas James, he is killing it in this role, and I'm glad he's being given a chance to flex his acting muscles, on top of all of his real ones, as his fight choreography is really solid. Though I will say, anyone who wants to rewatch the show and have a little bit of fun, take a sip of your drink every time he does a spin kick. Call this kid Beyblade, because he never stops spinning. Now one thing I like about how live action Zuko is handled is that he really feels his age. In the original, you could tell me that Zuko was 23 and I wouldn't question it. But here, Zuko really feels 16, and with that comes a sense of naivete that works for what they're doing with him. And yes, the actor is actually 22. God bless the baby face. But this version of Zuko isn't the same edgy boy he was in the original. He doesn't feel like he's ready to spontaneously combust at all times, and I think that softening of his character leaves room for us to really sympathize with this version of Zuko a lot earlier. He feels like a kid desperately trying to be cool and driven, but his youth keeps undercutting that, forcing him to seek help from others, which highlights his nobility and the kindness that got him in this situation in the first place. He has way more opinions on how the Fire Nation conducts war, what is honorable versus what is dishonorable, like when he thinks the Fire Nation is car bombing civilians. I can see people not liking these changes to the character, as he already feels like he is so much more open, more willing to take advice from his uncle, that now it feels like his redemption arc is gonna be just too easy. I feel like it's valid to want him to be angrier, but I think the show not walking back these choices makes me so much more willing to just see it play out. I enjoy how they flesh out his relationship with his crew. I love how they are the division that he stood up for, and his return to them after they discover all that he's lost for their sake. And not to sound sacrilegious, I think this is the one moment that stands on par with the original. It puts Zuko's suffering and loss against those he sacrificed everything for, and how he is rewarded for that with their loyalty. This change is the one thing that I unambiguously love. However, even while I do like what they're doing and I'm ready to hear them out, even he is plagued by this show's bloat problem of adding shit just for the sake of it, causing what should be powerful moments for Flash, then having to make smaller, weaker moments to replace them. Like the Agni Kai.
I won't fight you. You will learn respect, and suffering will be your teacher.
In the original, this moment is perfect in its simplicity and horror, where actually, even the war room before that has the same problem, as rather than Iroh letting Zuko attend a meeting he wasn't supposed to be at, making Iroh feel personally responsible for what happened, this time Zuko was invited, and just warned against not contradicting his father. And rather than having Zuko simply disagree with the general, they beat around the bush, have Zuko give a suggestion that's shot down. Matters seem settled, then after the meeting when the general is talking shit, Zuko snaps at him.
It's a terrible plan.
Hey, you don't have to raise your voice.
They take way more time, build up to a less interesting scene when the simple raw gut reaction of Zuko's disgust at throwing their lives hits way more than this tepid dance around the issue.
What better to use as bait than fresh meat?
You can't sacrifice an entire division like that.
It's a massive downgrade, but I can almost live with it, almost purely because of the fact that the Agni Kai is so much worse.
I won't fight you.
So that was a fucking lie.
In the cartoon, Zuko, upon realizing that he has to fight his father, just refuses to fight back, begging for his dad's forgiveness, and Ozai, in response, burns his face for what he views as weakness and embarrassing him in front of others. It's quick, it's simple, and speaks to just how monstrous Ozai is. That you see this act of submission and love to him, yet still decide to permanently scar Zuko for it. It's quick, it's simple, and fully conveys just the horror of what happened to Zuko and his current situation. That despite his noble intentions, that he has been warped by Ozai's hate and brutality, taking that sweet boy and making him into an Avatar-obsessed nutjob who would intimidate women and children to get what he wants. But instead of that, what New Avatar does is add a lot more for way less impact, as Zuko fights back. He still begs for forgiveness, but he then decides, oh yeah, I'll fight my dad just like my dad wants. And because we ruined that moment of mercy, we then have to make the thing that Ozai snaps at him for, being Zuko's refusal to hit his father in the face with fire that causes Ozai to scar him. Then, when Zuko talks back later about how the weak have a chance to grow strong, only then does Ozai seem to make the decision to send Zuko away, meaning that he made all this out of just some emotional outburst rather than an actual cold-blooded plan of punishment. This to me weakens the tragedy of what happened to him and lessens the message of how this abusive father warped his son into the Zuko we see at the start of the show. Not to mention, Nuvatar has this weird thing where it really wants to add nuance to Ozai. We see him choke up just a little bit as he's burning his son. He almost bitterly sends Zuko away. Now, I'm not against this. I'm not against giving Ozai more depth, but adding more to Ozai while watering down the Agni Kai, it just isn't a trade that will ever feel worth it to me. In a scene that should explain Zuko's pain and anger, we have Ozai bouncing from child-burning psychopath to tortured soul. I don't hate the idea, but I do think that this is not the time or place to really be conveying this information or try to add like sympathy to what Ozai is going through in this moment. It just ends up softening an already soft moment, with the only grace I'll give being that seeing Ozai choke up does add to the idea that in Zuko's mind that he actually has a chance of coming back. That this Zuko, already way more noble and good-natured than his cartoon counterpart was at this point, that Ozai, after seeing him maybe just a little bit of a tear, would actually consider letting him return home. Where the original, it is so cut and dry. You need Zuko to be obsessed to make him wanting to go back feel natural to the character despite all the red flags.
Let's settle this between us. Leader to leader.
Don't fall for it. We overpower them. It's no contest.
Well, where's the glory in that?
Also, one other thing, again, like this version of Zuko, entertaining, doomed by bad exposition, but the other thing that I kind of think is a massive downgrade, where they take Zuko's original hyperfixation, and say it with me, folks, 3, 2, 1.
Honor.
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 Instead, what they have Zuko talk about wanting to get back, like it's part honor, but instead he seems really specifically focused on the throne.
It'll all be worth it once I return home in glory to take my place as the rightful heir to the Fire Lord.
Perhaps it's time to consider that the throne isn't everything.
It's my destiny.
This isn't an awful change, but in tying him so much to the court politics of the Fire Nation for what feels like just the ye olde Game of Thrones fans, it again sacrifices the emotional weight of the original. In the cartoon, Zuko only really brings up being the heir to the throne like once, and it's in front of a bunch of Earth Kingdom peasants. For this Zuko, the thing he wanted back was his honor, the thing Ozai brainwashed him to thinking that he didn't have. When really, him sticking up for the 41st proved he had more honor than anyone else in the room. And for that, the idea of honor was burned into his flesh, and the need for Ozai's approval, which I think for personal motivations and getting us to care about the character, is a very easy sell. Zuko wanting the love of a parent is something that we can all relate to, just like how Zuko was always on a quest of redemption. Well, here in the new show, Zuko talking about the throne is just inherently more detached and just a less endearing goal. It works well enough, but it feels like it's just done to add a more political angle to the story. And this is like one of my big hot takes, is I feel like the show is at its most comfortable when it's dealing with the Fire family court politics. This feels like the story that somebody on the show or above actually wanted to make, but instead had to settle for adapting a cartoon. Overall, I like what they're doing with Zuko. His bond with his uncle is incredibly endearing, though I do have opinions on that as well. But Zuko is good in this show. Also, for how much stake Zuko puts into honor still, one change I think they should have made was rather than trying to ape the original reveal of the Blue Spirit, the story should have shown Zuko grapple the idea of donning the mask, to commit what is basically treason against his nation and to do so in a dishonorable way. Throughout this entire season, Zuko keeps commenting on what he considers to be honorable versus dishonorable combat, so it feels like we should have something before he makes such a big step like this. Zuko feeling like a young teen is great. The actor is doing a good job. And even if I don't love his quest for glory and how much that is like put at the forefront, his character is treated consistent throughout, so I'm pretty satisfied with how they handled him. Okay, now to talk about the other guy I like. Show me Mr. Rogers.
I'll let it pass because your dad's kind of cute.
God damn.
Paul Sung-hyun Lee is giving everything he has to this role, and I think he is a testament to how the direction and writing are completely fucking all of these actors. Like, I think most of the cast here can kill it in all of their roles, but they are being just directed to be so monotonous, so boring, so void of humor, that it makes just everyone feel like they're boring, just don't want to be here, when I feel like that is just the complete opposite. I understand that this is a different take on the character, and I kind of vibe with what they're going with, but all combined, they are doing this man so dirty and it annoys the shit out of me. Though I do love the bond between him and Zuko. Though, one thing about that, for as much as I like the bond between the two, I think the show's take on it isn't exactly to my taste. In the original, Iroh almost seems unconcerned with the Avatar. He's only really here to emotionally support his nephew and do damage control for what Ozai did to him, stealth guiding Zuko into being a better person or waiting for the opportunity to teach him when he's ready to listen. Zuko is out there trying and failing to capture the Avatar on his own, while Iroh feels like he's secretly trying to distract his nephew from that quest, to keep him from doing what he knows is wrong, but still helps where he can, as despite his disagreements with how Zuko is acting, his love for this poor lost soul remains. The way Nuvatar handles him is similar but very different. Iroh in the show is less goofy wise sage and more advisor and conciliary. Iroh in this version is constantly helping Zuko try and capture the Avatar, formulating plans with him, telling him just the best and most efficient way to get what he wants, advising him on how to keep his cool, and then smoothing over any disagreements that may pop up with figures like Zhao. Iroh has gone from mentor to kind of an enabler for Zuko's misguided quest to win back his father's respect, which feels at odds with his various attempts to suggest a different path for his nephew. Iroh feels like he's here, so he might as well try and help the child he cares so much about, but he's helping him go back to a place that hurt him and is clearly toxic. So while I still can enjoy this Iroh, I also feel like how this Iroh acts means that he can't really be a member of the White Lotus later. For those who don't know, is a secret society that spans all nations and is dedicated to spreading philosophy, beauty, and truth. This made sense for old Iroh, but here, it's more in line with a grieving man doing his best with what he has. If he actually has higher ideals he lives by, then him constantly aiding Zuko's quest will now feel at odds when he reveals himself to be a wise, multicultural figure this entire time. Especially with how he fumbles every response he gives to Aang when he asks why is the Fire Nation doing this. Dude is giving platitudes straight out of the Fire Nation propaganda textbooks.
But in the end, for most of us, it doesn't matter how this war started. It only matters how it can end.
Dude has seen his brother scar his own son. He has seen the horrors of war and its cost. Yet he still can't bring himself to publicly disagree with what the Fire Nation is doing, which could work when he's faced with the Earth Kingdom soldier, but he still talks like this even in private.
My brother, the Fire Lord, sees things through only one lens: victory or defeat.
Also, him lashing out the crew and making excuses for how Zuko treats them? No.
You're wrong, you know. About him not caring. Have you ever wondered how you and the others were assigned this mission?
Stop! Why don't you show that man some respect?
He's basically guilt-tripping them with the story of how Zuko saved their lives, which is crazy to me, and again, no. Or it was just Iroh trying to help the crew understand Zuko and what he's been through. All of this builds to an Iroh who is very similar but also very different from who he was in the original. More flawed and not as wise, but I think I can work with this if they commit to him being a flawed man. To not pull the I was actually in line card later, or to have him be so kind and understanding that he would let his nephew go away like he does. He can still push Zuko to try and choose a different path, but if they were trying to make him part of the White Lotus, it would make this characterization feel off. Similar to how Sokka jumping from Suki to Yue, yeah, after everything that they've done, it doesn't feel like it should happen. But they still do it because that's what happened in the original. But I'd still take Iroh being a member of it than having Boomy in this show be a member. But for all the potential pitfalls aside, I do enjoy Uncle Iroh here, for the most part. I miss him being more goofy, but the grief he feels for his son, the funeral scene, him even talking with the soldier, and especially him showing up to join Zuko while dancing around why he's here and just making jokes. All this just convinced me that there is a lot of potential here, it's just not fully letting itself capitalize on it. They have the right actor, they have the bond down, but my opinion on Iroh is going to be uplifted or destroyed by how they handle him later down the road. If they're doing this intentionally, I am all for it. If not, and they just keep trying to do, the same shit he did in the cartoon, then we are going to have a massive problem. But at the moment, they're staying consistent, and that is the bare minimum that I expect. And I appreciate that. Speaking of which, let's talk about what they did to Katara.
But remember what Mom told us too. She said that we have to protect those who can't protect themselves.
Okay, so Mom said it was cool to help people is fine as a motivational factor. That's what we call an external motivational factor, but it doesn't tell us anything about Katara's beliefs and what is motivating her internally. There's got to be something more than that, right?
It's about more than just helping Aang. Ever since he came into our lives, things have changed for me. Before I met him, I couldn't bend enough water to fill a thimble. And now look what I can do. And that's after a single day.
So she wants to continue on this adventure because piggybacking off of this kid is making her a dope bender.
Now, if you two would let me, I would just show Marisha Ray breaking down just how dirty this show did Katara, but I guess I'll just have to try and put my own spin on things. As what Nuvatar did, like, I speak 3 languages, English, gibberish, and mumble, but I don't have the word describe just how psychotically angry Katara's treatment makes me. And she's pretty much just taken from being the heart of the show to an afterthought.
Long ago, the 4 nations lived together in harmony.
Then everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
Son of a bitch. He stole my life.
Katara is screwed by this show. So much of what made Katara great in the original gets removed, resulting in her just becoming a blander character because of it, who the show then tries to make into a girl boss who didn't need any training even when it goes against the show's own fucking themes. I already touched on how this show handles Katara's mom's death is just so emblematic of the issues with its writing. Taking the death of Katara's mother, then not really showing just how that death impacted her. How her mother's death in the cartoon was this catastrophic event that we didn't need to see, but we can still see how it basically molded her into the person that she is today. As not only did she lose her mother, she was forced to replace her, taking on that maternal role to Sokka, while forcing her to be this caring, compassionate, and wise beyond her years kid. We don't see Katara agonize over what happened to her mom constantly, but having the context that her mom died, how she acts, just speaks to how much her mom's death affected her. While in Nuvatar, despite putting that death and its ramifications at the forefront, it all just makes it feel so much less impactful. Katara never feels like the team mom of the group. We never see her be someone else's emotional rock, grounding the characters and lifting them up in their darkest hour. She has instances of trusting people like Jet. But since Jet is like her one instance of trusting people, it turns that trust, that ability to like let others in, it starts to feel like a flaw, as the one time she opens up, it's to the literal fucking terrorist. The examples of Katara being the emotional core of the team in the story are either gone or altered so that her impact is lessened. Katara isn't the beacon of hope and optimism she used to be. When Aang first showed up in the original, she's the only one who immediately trusts him and is willing to defend him even when the rest try to exile him. Everyone just kind of accepts he's here, removing the specialness and the example of Katara's inner strength. As in the cartoon, and I know I'm really tired of saying that, but it's relevant. Everyone in this village is depressed as hell. Katara's ability to be hopeful and to dream of a better future is one of her greatest strengths. Well, here, it feels like she's just speaking in platitudes that don't really resonate with the rest of the story. And you really feel that when you look at how they've changed Katara and Aang's relationship at the start. In the cartoon, she is his biggest supporter, the one who got him out of the iceberg, both as an accident and then intentionally, which is a huge distinction. In Nuvatar, Sokka's telling her to stop waterbending because it is a threat to the village. They couch Sokka's opinion in some practical, oh, he's kind of right angle, diminishing Katara to being this docile young sister to Sokka's try-hard protector. The show makes Sokka seem more reasonable and makes Katara feels like she's wrong for waterbending, and she just kinda takes it.
If Dad were here...
But he's not here. I am.
You gonna let him talk to you like that?
This is a combination of issues, how the show just keeps removing any possible negative attributes for the characters, and how in removing Sokka's sexism, they now have to invent a different reason for him to be dismissive of Katara. But because the show also loves his ass, they can't commit to being actually wrong. Instead, he's just being kind of a dick. So Katara loses her moment where she chews Sokka's ass out for just being the worst, with her anger being the thing that gets Aang to the surface. And this shows off Katara perfectly, how she may be the team mom, but she was also forced into this role, and even she has limits with Sokka's bullshit. It shows off how powerful she could become and the temper hiding beneath the surface. Instead, what we get is Sokka being right, Katara just taking it. Then her freeing Aang is a complete accident, as she was just trying to get her boat back, but because she's just so ungodly strong, she cracks the iceberg, which, well, cool. I think it only serves to give Katara less character. As in the original, her anger may have been the thing that brought Aang to the surface, but it isn't what actually freed him. No, she sees someone in the iceberg. She doesn't know who this is. She doesn't know their story. She doesn't know anything about them. But she sees someone in need of help, so she grabs Sokka's club, ignores his objections, and chooses to break Aang out of the ice. Nuvatar strips Katara's agency away from her, makes her freeing Aang truly accidental, and this is just the cherry on top for what a worse introduction this is for her. One that strips away her personality, with all it giving in return being, again, an arc about power.
It's about more than just helping Aang. Before I met him, I couldn't bend enough water to fill a thimble. And now look what I can do.
This choice is baffling to me, as in the interest of condensing the story, they really removed anything Katara had that might be considered a flaw. And since they removed everyone else's as well, and the ability for any of them to really make mistakes, she is left with fewer chances to stand out because of this, as the show refused to lean into the empathy that so heavily defined her early on, and replaced it with nothing. It almost feels like they were afraid of her coming off as too preachy, so they just had her stand around. And to double back to Katara and Aang's relationship, and how it's just non-existent in this version.
Baby, you're my forever girl. Aang?
No, not that shit. Though I'm sure they'll start building up Aang having a crush on her next season when they look closer in age. No, what I mean is that this story doesn't let Katara be Aang's anything. In the original, Aang lost everything and is forced to build a new family unit with Katara and Sokka. The death of the air nomads is this horrific thing with no easy answer for closure. This thing happened in the past, and Aang is forced to live in the present. In New Avatar, moments that were supposed to show Aang growing closer to Katara, showing off her ability to connect and care for people, they're still technically there, but they're never the thing that actually helps Aang, and the story never frames it that way. So Katara feels like she's getting pushed to the side, even when this is supposed to be her big moment to contribute emotionally. When Aang gets kidnapped by Zuko, Katara is determined to get him back, with her assumption that Sokka wouldn't help her being proven to be untrue in a quick joke. As we see that Sokka isn't just ignoring her, but is actually preparing to leave. Katara is the focus, we know she's right, with Sokka only confirming that choice. Well, in New Avatar, Katara says the thing, but the show centers around Sokka and his choice, as he walks over to another teenager to put him in charge, and we waste too much time with Sokka telling this kid what to do, forcing Katara into the background in a moment where she should be the focus. This happens again when Aang enters the Avatar state for the first time. Katara did what she did in the original, calling out to Aang, telling him that she knows what he's going through. Even though loss is hard, they're his family now, and they can get through this. However, here, she's not actually framed as a thing that gets him to come out of the Avatar state. Nope, it's a memory of Monk Gyatso telling Aang,
I can't imagine a better person to have been given this power.
Every decision they make in the premiere is a detriment to Katara's character. I cannot understate this enough. And this is something that keeps happening over the course of the series till it's honestly a joke. When Katara tries to talk Aang out of the kaiju, as they can't really bank on any true emotional appeal, that they're family, that they're friends, we get none of that. Their relationship is so underfed that they have to default again to Aang just being the hero and the world needs him and Katara needs him. And there's no real catharsis here. We don't have the build up, we don't have the moment to make this truly pay off, just like we don't have enough of Aang angsting to really make this feel anything worth seeing. As yes, Aang has been depressed for this entire show, but he's also had moments of like being fun, then he's depressed. But he's also never been like angry or vindictive about being in the present, to make this Katara's take on it really hit. And not helping any of this is that he doesn't come down and hug her to calm down. No, instead he just floats above them like a god to the wonder of all watching. And that's kind of it, we're supposed to be impressed by this. They could have easily made this just a comeback to a speech that ties into the idea of togetherness and giving Katara a spotlight after just being robbed of so many except the most condescending kind. But no, the story defaults to Aang floating above everyone else, making the scene of him choosing the present, choosing them, distant and trying to invoke reverence, not community and his humanity. Back to the Gyatso thing, another hot take. I have never loved the idea that normal people can still be floating around in the spirit realm.
Gyatso?
Dumb as hell.
It was cool and emotional when they did it with Iroh, but as a lore addition to the world, I've never been in love with it. And that dislike was proven 100% right with how the show uses it here. It's just used as an excuse to have Aang meet Gyatso in the spirit realm. See, even when this creates like a semi-cute scene, it still ends up fucking Katara. Aang being able to get closure meeting Gyatso is such a weird choice. It feels like an attempt to absolve Aang of the guilt of running away even though he just went for a walk. But the real reason I dislike is that Katara, Sokka, everyone he meets later on, they are all his new family. He can never get back what he lost, but the tragedy of what happened to him doesn't impede his ability to keep living in the present, which is where his new family comes in and why his relationship to Katara is so meaningful. She is a representative of our ability to keep on moving forward, and she's the person that helps ground Aang in the present. So to have Aang's thoughts constantly go back to Gyatso and just the past in general, I think it is a detriment to everything in the present. We see this in the overly long prologue, where the show's obsession with showing genocide of violence, plus ripping away the fun in Aang's ability to live in the present. It paints a picture where all the show seems to focus on is the pain and the trauma, and not the life you live in spite of that. It takes one of the original messages of the show and twists it while not really having anything productive to say. The preoccupation with the past reduces Katara's role in the story, with every choice the story makes making this phenomena worse, as coming together, choosing hope, are all things that Katara represents, and all these things feel anathema to what this show is going for. We don't have Katara giving speeches about hope, we don't see her inspire those around her, nor does the show really give her choices the same weight as they do in the original, reducing her role, butchering her personality, and making her as stock heroine as possible, with all the show has to replace this butchering with being a message about power and how she's a girl boss, even when it betrays the message that the show keeps pretending to care about.
You little peasant! You found a master, haven't you?
Yes. You're looking at her.
Oh no, she didn't!
So Katara's entire arc in season 1 is relegated to her just getting good at water bending. We first see her bending, she's belittled for bending, her godlike power is what accidentally frees Aang. Then when they rescue him, rather than having a cute little scene of her working within her own limitation and flaws, of only really knowing how to throw water back, so she adapts to this, throws it blind, and is able to freeze the bad guys, we just see her step up her game so much that she's able to raise a pillar of water 15 stories in the air just to block Zuko's attack. Which, cool. Epic, but it's bland, it's impersonal. Where previously it was a great display of her personality and cleverness, here it's just bigger rather than better. And this paradoxically makes this achievement feel less impressive and way more forgettable, especially since it's treated as a reveal rather than us actually seeing her struggle to do the thing. Kinda like how she gets the waterbending scroll not being a product of her choosing to steal it to improve her abilities. No, that would give her too much agency and make her maybe unlikable since people have complained about that since the cartoon. Instead, it's just a gift from Gran, who says this is the time for her to learn since she's now with the Avatar, and she didn't give it to her earlier because despite having a place to train in private, her being untrained and practicing was more dangerous than her practicing with instruction. From there, we watch her lose Zuko after trying to protect Aang. I have no problem with this scene besides the bad exposition. Don't even mind the basic ass advice Aang gives to Katara, which seems to be the only way the show wants these two to be interacting. But then we get to Omashu, where Katara is trying to master the water whip, but ends up getting sucked into Jet's hype train, with Katara being our POV character for all of it. Then we get into what feels like narrative weirdness, as they have Jet, the child terrorist who car bombs city blocks, attempts to assassinate the king out of anger for him not doing enough against the Fire Nation and is apparently corrupt. He is the one who tells Katara that she shouldn't remember her mom's death, but how she lived and the positive memories associated with her. Which, okay, I like the advice and message, yet I can't think of a less thematically fitting character to give this speech than Jet, as this man is so utterly defined by the death of his parents that he car bombs his own city.
Look at the power you have. That's because of me.
That wasn't you. That was me.
Girls get it done.
And cut a rehearsal, no one move.
Also, her icing Jet feels like an afterthought rather than a climax, as Jet shows up after his relevant episode just to get beat, so it feels disconnected and doesn't feel like an actual triumph for Katara. Also, she doesn't do a full water whip in either of these episodes. She does the kinda whip-ish one she did in the original, like the first time she ever attempted it semi-successfully. So I won't dwell on it a whole lot as that would make me a complete hypocrite. But I do think there is an issue here where it's like a little hard to tell what makes a waterbending move more advanced. And just based on the graphics and the moment, it kind of feels like it's telling us this, but there's nothing really visual here to display why this move is so much more significant than all the others before it. Her time out hope to Aang, identical scene, robbed of its emotional weight, as we don't get to see it be brought full circle, as her influence on Aang influences Heibai, which ends up being the thing to save the day. It's Gyatso's ghost who helps Aang learn to live in the present. She and Sokka are damsels in distress. Then when we get to the North Pole, the story actually makes me lose my mind.
Get over yourself, you old fool, and let us get the job done. Girls get it done.
So here's the 1-2 downgrade of Katara when she gets to the North Pole. Everything in her arc up until this point has been about getting stronger, while removing all the emotional beats that really made her character shine, reducing her just being a strong woman whose own feats feel less meaningful, as the story never really frames it as this massive win, just something that happens and we have to go do other things. The story also completely neglects the fact that Katara is a healer. That was something that she just intuitively figured out, with it coming in clutch throughout the rest of the story. In Nuvatar, she only learns about this via instruction in the North Pole, where she proceeds to not not use it for anything meaningful, which just feels like a perfect encapsulation of how this show, in trying to make her stronger, actually ends up flattening her character, with even the act of healing people, one of Katara's greatest gifts, being removed, as it just doesn't make her look cool enough. Yet for all that said, I could be fine with the show centering around Katara getting stronger. I can live with that. What I can forgive, like Sokka supposedly finding other ways to be a hero or Aang getting help, what I can't forgive is how the show somehow managed to walk back its own themes and messages.
Connection. Building bridges.
You can rely on your friends.
You found a master, haven't you?
You're looking at her.
Working together and doing the impossible is treated like this show's mantra. It's the thing that the show really wants us to think will be the thing that saves the world, with most of the other avatars being overly aggressive, telling Aang he needs to be powerful or work alone. But what makes this just so hypocritical, what makes it not work, as for as much as they talk about coming together, working as a team, promoting the idea that they are stronger together, and looking for help isn't a bad thing, they decide to ignore that for Katara. She is the exception. He's having her get help, having her have a master, gets in the way of the she's a solo badass and she doesn't need no master.
You're looking at her.
This feels like a case where the theme and message of the show, the ones that they are claiming to promote, are ignored for the sake of Katara being badass, which just offends me personally, as Katara is one of my favorite characters. I love the hidden complexity of her character. So for the show to set up a theme that works, only to make exception for her so that she can seem more heroic, and avoid the topic of sexism entirely, while somehow adding even more sexist tropes, is beyond me. It honestly feels like the story was scared to lean into Katara's femininity and empathy, instead just like, okay, no, she's a badass, she's tough. She goes from her taking shit from her brother to being popular for making up a cool move and for having the need for more fighters trump age-old traditions, as combat and physical competence is valued more by this show than empathy and the ability to hope, with this philosophy being best seen, of course, in Katara, as they keep training examples of her empathy and reaching out to others, instead just gave her an arc about being strong and therefore she is gifted respect. Which is why this show and how it treats Katara is just so frustrating, as it seems to think its audience can't handle nuance, so we just boil it down to baby's first trope. We go from a moment of Paku realizing how his sexist attitude lost him the love of his life, to a stock let the women fight message while not having them contribute in a major on-screen way. They just blend into the background. And again, this is the issue of addition that doesn't really add anything. We go from a moment of a man realizing he's wrong, and hold off on him realizing his mistake, to go for a more performative women can fight to PSA, with the focus, again, going back to the idea of fighting in strength, not acceptance, and recognizing and then correcting past mistakes. This increased focus in handing Katara more power, like being in charge of the students, of being so good that she can teach Aang after only reading a scroll and through improv. The message that this gives isn't that it's okay to receive help, that you need others to be strong, but that special people like Katara and Aang are just so talented and powerful that being strong supersedes everything else about them, which feels more in line with how the Fire Nation thinks, which is a mentality that the heroes are supposed to be pushing against. The way Nuvatar handles sexism in the North Pole is just so hand-wavy. It doesn't want to actually deal with any of it, so it picks the path of least resistance and as little nuance as possible. It empowers Katara in the most condescending Hollywood strong woman way imaginable, as anything that might offend or turn people off has been stripped from this show, in what feels like a move done by people who are just obsessed with getting as many people to watch as possible, even when it was something that the story punished the characters for and made them learn, like Sokka being sexist. What the show did to Katara is just tragic. They cut away the love and heart that made this show work and replace it with a "we can do it" commercial, as saying women can do it while stripping away the empathy and relevance of your main female characters is the fake progressive thing overly safe Hollywood mega productions would do. Rip Katara, and the fact that the adaptation of a show that was so obviously anti-violence took its two most empathetic and kind characters and made their arcs about power and fighting, that will keep me up at night. But I pray, I hope, that they don't make her just a love interest to prop up Aang next season. Though after what happened with Sokka, I am not holding my breath. Though while I'm talking about holding my breath and being disappointed, Boomy.
Let it fall. And you win!
So I'm just gonna keep this one short and simple. I hate what this show does with Boomy. Not even for the he's not like he is in the cartoon reasons. I hate Boomy being this bitter and resentful old man trying to teach Aang about how much he's suffered and all the sadistic choices he's had to make. No, the reason I dislike is because it's all unnecessary.
It was a tragedy, and it might happen again, which is why I need to get to the Northern Water Tribe as soon as possible.
Aang is already bummed out and avoiding all detours to make a beeline for the North Pole. This version of Aang already gets what Bumi is saying, so him venting his frustration about this war, like, it just feels like him preaching to the choir. If Aang was more fun-loving, if there was a contrast, I could really see this working for what they're doing with him. Hell, I'd even say this rant is kinda warranted. But here, what we're left with is Bumi beating a very dead horse for very little gain. Bumi's attempts at lessons are all dumb and pointless without clear, obvious, or even like creative answers. You're in a room full of growing crystals. Do you come up with a smart way to get past it? No, Aang just blows them away. He picks a fight with Bumi. He's trying to force Aang to let him die. Bumi feels like he's being random for the sake of being random, then he's actually trying to teach Aang anything. It feels like we're stalling for time without a real point to it, especially since the point that they build up to, Bumi trying to teach Aang to make an impossible decision, just gets refuted, only for the show to walk it back in the finale. With this feeling semi-unintentional, we don't get the feeling that Aang, in these various flashbacks, he doesn't really mention Bumi and go, oh no, he was right. I mean, all we're left is like an okay experience watching, but when you look back, it just feels off. It has this feeling that we got this injection of edgy resentment because we can't have him do silly challenges. No, instead we have to have him hold Aang hostage when Aang wants to leave, even when he doesn't know if he's accomplished his mission of stopping the terrorists. I think Bumi being the one to make Appa's whistle is cute, and wow, I straight up forgot Appa was in this show. Just like they did.
Beast is in good hands. My men will take him to our Buffalo Yak stables.
Appa is just a fast travel system here. I know this thing must be expensive to animate, but still, I will admit this thing is kinda terrifying in real life. But to finish up with the actual character, Bumi, and I hate to use this term as it feels denigrating, but it is the most accurate thing to describe the vibe here. Bumi in this show feels like an edgy fanfic. I could almost get behind what they're doing, but with how the show wrote Aang, the story ends up agreeing with Bumi's fatalism in the finale. All of it feels like it just edged for the sake of it, where they wanted more drama, they wanted more tension, they wanted us to take this so much more seriously, but didn't really have any real points to go along with it. You know, it just fails to emphasize Aang realizing he made a mistake by thinking like him later. Aang giving him hope feels hollow when so much of the show sidesteps the topic entirely in the favor of force. It's a take on a character that I don't love, but every choice around Bumi feels pointless and performative, as we waste so much time with the genocide that we were already serious. So him yelling at Aang that he needs to make hard choices just feels repetitive. Aang isn't fun enough to make this idea feel warranted, so I just mentally check out whenever Bumi is on screen, which is a tragedy.
And now for something completely different.
So, what's next?
So I think everything that deals with the Fire Nation royal family is a show at its most comfortable. I don't think Azula needed to be in this season. Her dialogue is as clunky and exposition reeled as everything else, if not worse.
I realize he's playing games with you, right? It didn't feel like a game when that boulder was flying at my head. Just saying.
But if I were to give this show any credit for doing something pretty well, I do like how it makes explicit just Ozai's abuse of Azula. She's his favorite, yes, but she's just as much his victim as Zuko is. Ozai dangles Zuko in front of her, praising him just to make her feel worse about herself, all while the threat of being rendered irrelevant and exiled looming over her head. Ozai is manipulating her into being his attack dog, and while it's clunky, I do think that this is a nice addition. I just think trying to put her into this part of the main story is kind of dumb. Like her being the puppet master for Zhao, it just isn't a terrible choice, but the reveal is unintentional comedy.
Who do you think was my ally? Who convinced the Fire Lord to send me the Yuyan archers? Who identified the blue spirit sword?
Azula in this season feels like she's being set up for events later down the road, so this is a character that I don't hate, as they didn't betray anything in making her, but it is all going to come down to see how they pay it off later. And I also think that for all the praise I gave Zuko for finally feeling his age, thanks to this being a live-action adaptation, I think Azula kind of gets hit with the opposite effect, as it's really hard to capture the level of menace Azula was in the cartoon, especially when she's being played by an actual teenager. Hello? She's 21?
I made another mistake.
I like how Azula in this version is kind of just a spoiled bratty girl. She's not the full psychopath she was in the show, she's still aggressive, yes, but you can so obviously see that she was trained to be this way. The fact that she does not have everything under control just makes her feel so much more human, so it really opens up a lot of possibilities for her later down the road. She can get so much worse, but she can also get better. This might be the version of the story where they actually redeem her, and not just lock her away as this tragic figure, only do weird shit with her like they did in the comics. I'm optimistic, I think the show is at its most comfortable with the politics bullshit, even though it doesn't fully fit in with the rest of the story. Speaking of which,
you will find, capture, and bring me the Avatar.
I'm mostly okay with Ozai. He's the same monster, just a different flavor. Another case of wait and see. I can dig the idea of Ozai just adding just a little nuance to him, that he may be just a messed up version of Zuko, one where his kindness was actually being out of him, who thinks he needs to be this cruel monster to really get what he wants when he's being the Fire Lord. Hence his disgust at Zuko at showing weakness, as rather than just some pure narcissistic power trip, it could be more of a case of his self-hatred. Seeing his son display the same traits that he had being out of him, cue generational trauma with Ozai taking things farther than his own dad did with him, maiming Zuko for his own reasons, with him later trying to retcon it and just saying, oh no, I did that for Azula. I do think there's something interesting going on that they could take Ozai in later. I don't know if he's really this master manipulator, or he's just really good at pretending that he has things under control and making up a lie to say, oh yeah, this is my master plan, as him exiling Zuko is framed as a moment of anger that he couldn't hold back. It's in line with this type of delusional where he rants at his own son for questioning his plans, and he just took all of that personally. So I wonder just how much of Ozai's actions are just him actually having a plan, or him being controlled by his emotions and no one can really call him on it. As I kinda need this to be true, as I have no other way to explain just how dumb this plan was.
Why attack the North at all?
Distraction.
It was still a stupid plan.
Like, first off, North Pole and Omashu are nowhere close to each other. In fact, they are so far apart. The North Pole is the North Pole, while Omashu is closer to the equator. Any info about what would happen at the North would take weeks or months to get to Omashu, so therefore, anything that might happen or any way this might work as a distraction really doesn't work, as the Earth Kingdom would find out anything that the Fire Nation is doing way faster than any news from the North, making this a very ineffective distraction. With Sozin, it at least kinda makes sense what he did, got all the attention on other areas, and he was able to still stealthily move to go kill the air nomads. Well, here it's just, no, this is a whole ass invasion. You cannot say this is a distraction, it doesn't make sense. Second, Omashu didn't send any support or aid that we saw that would like imply they are in a weakened state to make them more susceptible to being attacked. If they did, please say so I can make this make sense. As otherwise, it just feels like Ozai is saying shit, that he refuses to admit his mistakes, so he says all this was a scheme when it doesn't feel like it in any sense, especially the logistics. But I doubt that since this stinger is meant to be treated as menacing. Speaking of menace, the fact that we see a 14-year-old Zuko nearly KO his dad during the Agni Kai, that really diminishes the idea that Aang needs to master all 4 elements to take him. All he really would need in this show is himself and one other person. I know he has a whole army backing him up, but bro, he nearly lost to a 14-year-old. Not to mention Sozin's comment when that eventually happens is just kinda nerfed, as even when they're attacking the air nomads, those guys are fighting back, not getting wiped out. We see dead bodies, yes, but they're putting up a good fight, and it honestly feels like a lot of them could have been able to get away if they just flew, as it takes these comet power firebenders just to bring down one air nomad. We didn't need this prologue, and the more you think about it, the dumber this whole sequence feels. But moving on to the last character, Zhao.
Tonight, we will celebrate!
I know it seems like I hate this show just because it changed things from the original, which there is a little bit of truth to that. So just to try and make this as clear as possible, I'm fine with adaptations making changes. Hell, I'm okay with them changing entire characters. My issue with Netflix's Avatar is that the changes that they make are often to the detriment of its own story and characters. Decent ideas and characters get wasted or watered down, with the themes that the show is trying to promote being contradicted later. When the story stays consistent, I can still sit back and mostly enjoy them, but seeing moments ripped right out of the original, only to not follow through on them, to add shit that makes those moments worse, that to me is the bigger offense. It's not that they change things per se, it's that the writing sucks. This show doesn't have to be good or do the same things as the original, but it also needs to be consistent and follow through on its own ideas. So what it does doesn't fall apart under the smallest amounts of scrutiny, or make you realize that they fumble what could have been a decent emotional climax. I knew this show wasn't going to live up to the original, but I don't think it would let itself down this much. Even though there's clear examples where they stay consistent and everything is able to finally work itself out, like what they did with Zhao.
I admit that I have little experience
that also means that I have no track record of failure.
This is basically a new character. He is nothing like the original Zhao from the show, minus some hints about having some delusion of grandeur after killing the moon spirit. But in this version, Zhao isn't some big, intimidating villain. He's a slimy failure looking for his chance to steal all the glory. He's basically a better foil for Zuko in this show than Zhao was in the original, as here, they're both obsessed with their own promotion to the detriment of others. They are both obsessed with their own glory. They are also both not as good as they think they are, requiring outside help to keep them on track. I think Ken Leung understood the assignment with the weird, long-winded dialogue working for a character who is meant to be a blowhard. This Zhao is basically a parasite piggybacking off of other people's accomplishments, making people explaining the real plan to him feel in character rather than just please stop talking. Hell, I think the only thing really wrong with this version of the character has nothing to do with the performance. It's just again another thing of dumb shit, why is this here? Zhao doesn't need a special dagger. You don't need all this extra lore about the water spirits. And him thinking he can just become the Fire Lord, like it's just there for drama, even though it services no real point. But none of these actions contradict his writing, so while dumb, it's not egregious or breaking my suspension of disbelief. He is a slimy little man, and even if I think the "it was her" speech is a little much, I think this all mostly works out. You may not like this take on Zhao, but the story doesn't trip over itself like it does with most of the other characters, so I can just turn my brain off and enjoy him. The writing for him is consistent. We can say that Aang giving into temptation, making a sadistic choice on his own, is set up for him needing to learn a lesson later, but the framing for this moment is heroic. It is Aang coming into his destiny. The story isn't resetting to do something later. It feels inconsistent and trapped between what it wants to do and what it feels like it has to do because the original did it. Like I said at the beginning, I think this show is just pretty It's not good, but when you watch this show, it isn't a terrible experience. The fights are fun, the CGI, okay for the most part, some god tier moments though. But when you stop to think about any of it for too long, you realize just how much of this show is tripping over itself and it falls apart. Once you notice how Sokka is getting put on a pedestal to the expense of everyone else, it's hard not to notice. Once you notice how Katara is just in the background and her only thing is being a badass, you can't stop noticing it. Just like how the show keeps boiling down every character to power and strength while at the same time preaching how they all need to come together only for everyone to end up acting alone. Netflix's Avatar was never going to be as good as the original. I think casuals will have a good enough time with it. But this thing, it's definitely one of those shows that will get worse the more you come back to it. Which is a shame since the original only gets better the more and more you watch it. None of the actors are to blame, and I honestly don't blame the writers much either. As while most of my complaints boil down to the writing, in mega franchise projects like this, there are so many cooks in this kitchen that it's hard to tell who's actually responsible and who's just taking the heat. So I don't want anyone to get harassed over this video, everyone's doing their best, and hopefully the second season will be better, even though I'm not that excited for it in the slightest. Best case scenario, it inspires more people to check out the original, and that attention will convince studios to make more animated projects. This show butchered the characters, but overall, it's just, It took what made the original great, blended it all together, and while I didn't hate myself watching it, it's just a experience. And once you start to think about what actually happens, you realize how flimsy this story actually is. The characters in this story deserve better. These actors deserve better. Avatar deserves better. And the kids watching especially deserve better. It's crazy to look back and see all the ideas that the original Avatar tackled. From the effects of imperialism on the oppressed and the oppressor, to how war and loss affects those growing up, and how we always need to find a way to move forward. Avatar: The Last Airbender may have been marketed to kids, but it never held our hand, and never repeated the same information and treated us like we were idiots. We didn't need to see the air nomads getting wiped out or Katara's mom getting burned to understand how horrific it was. The original treated its audience with respect, trusting even young kids to understand why Sokka being sexist was meant to be seen as a bad thing. This adaptation, despite ostensibly being for kids and Game of Thrones fans, coddles its audience and reduces the most complex ideas into lip service, where the themes struggle to be coherent and we can't even be trusted to mourn the death of a character. Avatar: The Last Airbender was a labor of love, and you can feel that with every episode. I'm sure so many people worked on this adaptation and gave it their all. But this thing feels like a product and is so terrified of ever being challenging, of offending its audience, of making us feel just a little bit uncomfortable that it just decides not to and just keeps chugging along. Blissfully unaware that in trying to be more appealing, it ended up just being a mess. Okay, I've talked long enough. Now tell me what you guys thought of the show. Did you enjoy it? What were your issues? Gonna be honest, I thought this video was gonna be like 30 minutes max. But the more I started taking notes, the longer and longer the paragraphs got, till I was actually shocked by how much this show bugged me. This thing was a behemoth to make, so if you want to be kind, like and share the video so others can see it as well. This isn't my usual, strictly cartoon nonsense, and I am a little late, so any help is appreciated as the algorithm is an unforgiving bitch. Love you all, peace out, this has been Sarcastic Chorus, and I need to take a nap.